Hi gang, Dr. Shu here again in my office today. I wanted to give you some more segments of our lecture for Saturday, March 11th. This section is on reliability and validity and how it relates to selection. So you probably learned about reliability and validity in statistics class, and that's great. When we talk about it in terms of selection, we're really interested in the consistency among sources, methods, and evaluators for our selection process. And there's three kinds of reliability that we're most concerned about. One is inter-rater reliability, and that means among your different raters, are they doing the same thing? Are they thinking in the same frame of reference when they rate, say, interviews? For example, if I interview someone and Calvin interviews someone, do we both come to about the same conclusion about them? Right, we might notice a couple different things about them, but if he comes up and says, oh, you know, they're terrible, oh my gosh, horrible, and I say, oh, I thought they were great, then something's wrong with our reliability. We're probably thinking about the candidate in a different way, and that's not helpful, and it's not consistent. Same thing for multi-method reliability. That relates to among the different methods that we use, whether it's a test, an interview, application blank, or reference check, whatever, are we finding similar information? So, for example, if somebody does fantastically on a test and they get a 95 out of 100, and we invite them in for an interview and they just tank it, they're terrible and they don't show well at all, they don't have any answers that are correct to the questions that we ask, hopefully job-related questions, something's wrong. Something's wrong with the process, right? Either the candidate maybe didn't take the online test, right, or take the test themselves, or maybe they just don't interview well, but there's no consistency between the different tools in the process. And then the third kind of reliability is what we call internal consistency, and that refers to within an individual selection tool, within a test, within an interview, are the items consistent with each other? And the idea is that they should be pretty close, right? They're not asking about apples and oranges. So, for example, if part of your job is to do proofreading for people's correspondence, emails, and business letters and things like that, and I ask you some questions about grammar and say, can you correct this sentence? And then the next question is, do you speak Spanish? Well, what does that have to do with the task of correcting grammar and proofreading business correspondence, unless some of it is in Spanish, right? So there's no real consistency between those two pieces and those two questions on the same instrument or the same tool. So HR needs to think about this. We need to look at and evaluate the selection tools that we use. We need to make sure our interviewers are trained. We need to make sure that our questions on our assessment tools hang together and are consistent internally. We need to make sure that if there is any dichotomy in terms of what we find between a test and an interview and whatever, that we understand why that's happening and do our best to make sure we control for that. So the other thing to think about in terms of reliability and validity is there are four different kinds of validity that we think about when we're thinking about selection. The sort of overarching idea of validity is what we call construct validity. And a construct is just a fancy psychological term or social science term for a concept or an idea, right? So the question is, do your selection tools accurately reflect what the concept of the job is or the idea of the job? So if you take a second and you close your eyes and you think about how would you conceptualize the job of a restaurant server, right? What the first thing that comes to mind? You can say it out loud. I can't hear you. Is it that they have to be fast? They have to be accurate. They have to be pleasant. They have to deliver food. They carry trays. They work in a hot kitchen. Whatever, right? And these are all parts of the job. And if we went over and over that and brainstormed it for a while, we'd have a full idea of what the job is about. And we could think about what kinds of tools would help us to figure out how to test people to see if they're good at this job, if they have elements of this construct. And that kind of gets parlayed into what we call content validity. And content validity comes almost more directly from the job description, right? The content domain, if you will, is a term we use to describe the complete set of skills and abilities someone has to have to be able to do the job. Right? If we have extra things in there that we're testing for, like in the previous example, asking the proofreader if he or she speaks Spanish, we have what's called content contamination. We're testing more than what the job is about, which isn't really fair because it could result in discrimination. If we have, if we're missing an important point, if we have a proofreading job and we ask people to, do some corrections, but we don't ask them anything about punctuation, and they're just not good at that, we've missed an opportunity. We've missed an opportunity to understand if they understand how to do punctuation correctly. And that's what we call content deficiency, right? We forgot part of the job, or we neglected to ask about or test part of the job that's going to be important for somebody who gets the job, gets hired. So you can think about it in this way. There's lots of different tools that you could use to evaluate somebody's skills and abilities. Would you give your server candidates a personality test? So you're looking for restaurant servers. Are you going to ask them personality questions? And you can decide. I would say maybe yes, right? Because you'd like to know that they're going to be a good fit with the restaurant and the culture and things like that. It might not be as critical as some other parts of the job. Would you give your server candidates a physical ability test? And I would say, again, maybe yes, because it's a pretty important part of the job. Not necessarily are they, can they do 50 push-ups, but can they carry that tray around, a heavy tray around? Can they be on their feet all day long, back and forth to the kitchen, to the tables, and so on. One I didn't list on here, but you could ask yourself this, is would you give your server candidates, say, a writing test, right? And the answer to that is probably not, right? Maybe they're writing down orders on a little pad or something like that. But in terms of, can they write a business letter or a paper or, or a HR application, it's probably not relevant for them to be able to do that, to be able to do their job as a server. So that's what we would call content contamination, right? We're not really interested in their writing skills. We're more interested in, are they going to be a good fit for the culture? Are they going to be able to carry the tray around? Are they going to be able to move back and forth to the kitchen pretty rapidly and pretty regularly? So, other two types of validity are criterion-related validity and face validity. Criterion-related validity is really what shows us that predictors are related to outcomes. That's right out of statistics. What that means in terms of selection is, do your selection tools, do your tests, your interviews, etc., predict who's going to be a good performer on the job? The idea is, hey, if you ace the interview, if you ace the test, that should mean we're going to hire you and you're going to do a great job for our company, right? And you can figure this out through correlation and regression, and we can do all kinds of statistical analyses to see if that worked correctly. And this is what the government, by the way, is going to be most interested in when you talk about validity. They're going to want to see that you did evaluate to demonstrate that, hey, look, we gave these tests, we gave these interviews, whatever, and they are clearly related to job performance. People who can do well in these tests, who can do well in an interview, are going to be the best performers on our job. And that can even forgive a lot of sins. So, for example, if you have a selection tool that might potentially have some discrimination or discriminate against people, we don't want that to happen. But if you can demonstrate, hey, look, we looked around for something else that would do a better job of showing who was good at this job, and we couldn't find anything. Again, think about the servers carrying the tray. We make our candidates carry a tray around and just demonstrate. And the ones who are best at carrying the tray or can carry the tray longest tend to be our best servers, right? And they say, well, what about people with disabilities? And you can say, well, listen, we've got this correlation here that demonstrates if you're a really good tray carrier, you might be a really good server, or you're going to be a really good server, and therefore there's just not much we can do to waive that requirement of the job, right? And that's going to be a good defense for your organization to be able to say, yeah, listen, it's a job requirement, and here's why we know, because people who can take this test and do well are going to be people who perform well on the job. Then the last kind of validity is what we call face validity. And face validity is really accuracy on the part of perception, if you will, of the candidate or the applicant, right? Do they look at it, and on the face of it, does it seem like it should be valid? Does it seem like the test or the instrument or the tool or the interview or whatever it is asking the right questions about that job, right? Does it if you're asking a question that makes them say, yeah, you know what, I understand that that's part of the job, and that's why you want to know if I have this skill or I have this ability or I know how to do this task, that makes perfect sense, right? If you're asking something that doesn't really fit into their sort of perception of what the job's about, their content or construct domain, then they're probably going to say, well, why are you asking me this weird question, right? And remind me next time we get together, because I want to tell you this myself. I want to talk about my favorite HR story of all, and that is related to face validity and criterion-related validity. And by the way, all these validities are sort of independent of each other. So you can have a test or an interview or whatever that's highly criterion related, that shows a really great relationship between how they score on the test or the selection tool and how they do on the job. that has terrible face validity, or vice versa. You can have one that's got great face validity but has terrible criterion-related validity. Right? Think about an example of this. If you have a great face valid question or interview or test or whatever, it might say something like, do you understand, do you like to eat, right? And a person who's looking for a job as a server might say, well, yeah, I do like to eat. I like to be around food. I think this is a great question, because I'm going to be working in a restaurant. It's important for me to know, that I like to eat, and I like to eat the food that they're going to serve at the restaurant, be able to recommend it to customers, things like that. So if you think about it logically, you might say, yeah, that makes good sense. It's a good question to ask. Criterion-related validity might be kind of low, right? You might be able to say, well, it doesn't really matter if people like to eat or not. They could still be good servers or bad servers. Some people who like to eat are terrible servers. Some people who don't really like to eat are probably great servers, right? They start picking off the customer's plates. That's probably a bad thing. So it has good face validity, but not so great criterion-related validity. Okay, so that's it for this section. I'm going to kind of keep this one short, and there'll be a couple more sections to look at on our D2L site. Thank you.